So, Rosebell, the first breath is the lens for today's conversation here. What does it mean to you, and why is it important to you in your work as an African feminist activist?
I think the first breath is very important to me as a feminist, as a journalist, as someone who runs a platform where African feminists, share their struggles, their joys, and the kind of interventions they are doing in their communities. So I come here in that lens. I think that we have to think about the first breath, personally, as something that oftentimes we take it for granted. We think it is something universally experienced in the same way. But for me, it's important that we think of the historic, socio-economic, and political circumstances and conditions in which that first breath happens. So when I think of the first breath, I think of a woman who is stuck in a healthcare facility that is not well equipped, without medical care, without health workers surrounding her, and she has to bring life without that support. I think of a woman, a migrant woman, on a boat stuck in the Mediterranean, trying to give birth without any help, yet again, because the border on the other side will not be opened for them. I think of a woman stuck at a border, trying to flee Gaza, trying to flee Sudan, to flee war, in order to find safety, in order to give life. I think of a teenage girl in a rural area who cannot have a choice but to be pregnant and deliver a child of an abuser. It's very important to reflect on the different circumstances that could happen for many women. And to know that for a lot of women, the first breath of a child actually comes oftentimes with the last breath of a woman. And the maternal mortality is still a very, very big issue for us in many African countries. So I think that we have to look at how many millions of people experience that first breath, and to know that oftentimes that is not a universal experience. It's not guaranteed. It is often very negotiated. The question is, how do we make systems function for those that are largely on the margins?
So you're saying that this situation or these challenges and problems we're facing are political, created by some kind of extractive systems fostering inequalities and gender disparities. Could you elaborate a bit more? What exactly do you mean by that?
I think no matter where you're seated in the world today, we are surrounded by forces that are trying to dictate what kind of life we should have and what kind of histories should be remembered. We are seeing the rise of populism. We are seeing women's bodies become deployed in political arenas, in parliament, debated whether you can have this choice, whether you can have this service or not. We have seen largely many countries investing so much in militaries in Europe, in Africa, in many parts of the world. The military budgets are swelling and wars are multiplying, and the consequences for women and children are here for us to see. So we see a lot of stigma in many circumstances. We see discrimination rising for gender expansive people that don't fit in the definition of patriarchal heterosexual understanding of the world, and they are being forced, to caged. And it's very important to reflect on those moments that the first breath happens for different people in these circumstances are something we need to look at. And we know that despite all these things happening, we have many people in our communities that are trying to do the work of patching up and making the communities to survive every day, carrying the load for us. But we have been warned for several decades by African feminists that we shall not innovate or entrepreneur ourselves out of systemic failures. We have to face the systemic failures of the day and imagine outside those failures. Yep.
So you described the local context a bit and now the more geopolitical context. If you had to break it down also as being a spokesperson for mainly African women in that context, what are these realities African women navigate and that the rest of the world often neglect or misunderstand?
That's quite a heavy question and a heavy responsibility. I will not be a spokesperson for African women, but really speak to the conditions that I know of, that I read about, that I experience as an African woman. We know that the image of an African woman in an African child oftentimes globally is an image of someone without agency. And it's because that we have seen so much suffering over the many decades post-independence, even our independence struggles. We have made quite good progress on many fronts, but the reality is that this image is a single image, and it's very important to reach to the communities and to the people to see what are they doing, what is the agency. But the reality is we don't see a good understanding of why are we seeing so much pain, why are we seeing this image. We see the invisibilization of African women's labor in the economy, in the politics, but also the denial of African women's knowledge in science. And that denial affects what kind of health outcomes can happen, or what kind of services they can have. So we have to go back to the question of knowledge, whose knowledge, the pyramid of knowledge, and all going back to the fact that we are colonized, and the knowledge within which we are operating in puts our knowledge at the periphery. So that's a struggle we have every day for us. Say we are here, this is our life, and these are the systems that dictate our being today. So it's very important to understand and situate African women's knowledge and what they're doing about that, but also to look at the question of economy and healthcare, and to know that actually many of the African women do spend out of their pocket on healthcare. Healthcare budgets for households is very, very high. And we always say that we might joke about it, but we always say we're always one illness away from poverty. It doesn't matter how far you have risen as an African, but healthcare becomes a question. But this healthcare is not just an individual struggle. We live in countries that are designed to be indebted. My own country is indebted. It pays more money on debt repayment than on education and healthcare. So if a child is best in that country, these are not just macro issues. This is the daily reality, and that dictates whether, a first breath can be had in dignity, or what kind of repercussions happen for that woman.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you spoke about the systems, right? To the system that need to be adapted and to make the system work for these people, women at the margins, as you described. But what can be done then? What does it actually look like to center these margins on a macro, but also on a more local level, perhaps?
I think this has been a kind of cry or demand for African feminists, for African Black feminists, to talk about. They've long theorized when the margins become the center. And sometimes we rarely live to see that, but it's a struggle of our time that oftentimes the resources and the voices and the decisions are being made for you. So making sure that power, it's a question of power, and who is determined to be at the periphery and who is at the center. And this kind of power is both on gender and racial, but also in the kind of neoliberal, neocolonial economies and systems of power that we are living in as a global, as a community situated in a global system. So for me, bringing the margins, the center, is really to know that there are solutions already at the margins, that people are not waiting for you. There's innovation at the margins. But oftentimes this innovation is extracted and sold back. Today you see that African village health teams, which is comprised of many women, they collect data. This data is taken by big technology companies, and they come back to sell the interventions back to us. But no one recognizes that labor of those women. So oftentimes we have to think of what is being extracted from the margins. What would it take for us to recognize that labor, repay that labor, and give it the proper value, because it's currently devalued. And it also calls us to really scrutinize the global inequality, to know it's not an accident, but a design of history, of systems that continue to work. It calls us to ask the question, how do we right the wrongs beyond apologies that we are seeing from different countries? It also asks us, how come the first breath in Germany is so far different from a first breath in Gaza today, or in Congo, or in Goma, or in Sudan, as we see today, where all these are large humanitarian challenges we face. So for me, it's a question of the systems that have made people the periphery and where power is dictated over their lives. At the end of the day, it dictates who survives and who thrives, ultimately. And we are saying that at the end of the day, dignity for the first breath should not depend on geography, gender, race, or political decisions imposed on you by superpowers.
Mm-hmm. So we need to better understand the context to bring transparency into that field. And I hope that today we contributed a bit to this. But before we have to leave the stage, if there was one thing that you would like us to take away from the conversation and from this discussion and from this topic, what would it be? What would you like to share with the audience?
I would say critical consciousness. We have to be constantly aware, and we have to know that what we know, usually we know from a place of privilege. So until you go to the margins without the intention of extracting the margins for your visibility, for your own end, then we have to continuously to be humble enough to learn to respect the demands of the margins. That at the end of the day, we say that the way the margins fight is not going to be to the comfort of the privileged. So be humble enough and go away with critical consciousness on seeing what kind of power am I on and what is the periphery and how can I actually contribute to understanding, but also to changing the power dynamics that we see in the world today that is very, very unsustainable.
Mm-hmm. So critical consciousness, continued consciousness.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you.